So the first major release of 2025 just so happens to be a sequel to a cult classic crime film from 2018. My initial thought after watching the original Den of Thieves and then watching its sequel Pantera is that there's no way that these two movies were made by the same person. Well, it turns out that they are made by the same person, and even now that I know that, it's still very hard to believe. Let's discuss.
I watch so you don't have to.
Before I get started, I'd like to kindly ask that you hit the like button, and please subscribe to the channel for more content just like this.
Come on. Do it. Do it!
Den of Thieves 2 Pantera once again follows lawman Big Nick O'Brien, who gets embroiled in the treacherous and unpredictable world of diamond thieves as he pursues career criminal Donnie Wilson to Europe. So the original Den of Thieves, while it's no masterpiece in its own right, it did offer something in the way of making it feel like the long-lost cousin of Michael Mann's Heat. It had a sort of visceral, gritty, and raw nature to it as we watched this flawed cop traverse the underground world of LA bank and armored car robberies. There was something to be said about how that movie oozed this machismo and high tea energy. In a lot of ways you can say that we don't get movies like Den of Thieves anymore, and you know what, maybe we should. A good or even decent crime or heist movie that shows the conflict from both sides of the law, I think will always be appealing to audiences. It's one of those tried and true cinematic concepts that I believe never truly goes out of style.
I like it a lot.
I have to confess that I was a little bit surprised that Den of Thieves got a sequel to begin with. I mean, I do understand that the ending of the original film basically sets up a sequel in some aspects. But at first glance, it would seem that a sequel to this movie would be very hard to pull off. And it turns out that it actually is. Especially considering that a lot of the memorable characters from the first film do not make it out of that film alive. The idea for Pantera was clearly to take things out of the LA streets and maybe up the ante with the more heist aspects of the film by taking things international. And while I suppose that is a logical direction to take this franchise in, but if you didn't have the two carryover characters and you just renamed them something else, this movie could have very easily been its own standalone heist movie that has absolutely nothing to do with Den of Thieves.
That makes sense.
To me, the vibe was inconsistent with the first. The tone was inconsistent with the first. I'm not even entirely sure that those two returning characters are consistent with what was established about them in the first film. While Den of Thieves was clearly going for a Heat vibe, its sequel is clearly trying to go for a Mission Impossible or Ocean's 11 vibe. And maybe that was their plan. Maybe that was their way of taking things to the next level and trying to differentiate this movie from the original. But that gritty and raw tone that we mentioned earlier in the review is almost completely abandoned in the sequel. There are actual moments in Pantera where it feels like a string of bits just kind of glued together, more so than it does actually trying to tell a story.
How can you not care?
Like this.
Donnie, played by O'Shea Jackson Jr., for some reason, felt very out of place in this role this time around. I mean, regardless of the fact that he's a lot thicker than he used to be, the great thing about his character from the first movie is that he was basically a wolf in sheep's clothing. But now that we know what he is, and we know what he is supposed to be about, watching it play out on screen, it was just never believable to me. And then we have Gerard Butler, who is returning to the role of Big Nick. And listen, if you've been watching my videos for any amount of time, you know that I speak very highly of Gerard Butler. I strongly believe that he should be that go-to macho movie star character actor that Hollywood should learn to lean on. I mean, he gave me that vibe in Kandahar, he gave me that vibe in Plane, and he also gave me that vibe in the original Den of Thieves. But in Pantera, it feels like he's kind of going through the motions, and this could have something to do with the fact that he actually admitted recently that he was absolutely miserable filming this movie. So I don't know if it was the material, or Gerard's just general lack of interest, or a little bit of both. But Big Nick in this movie feels like a shell of his former flawed, but also badass self. I actually felt like this time around, they were very much trying to use the character of Big Nick to play up the laughs in the most forced way possible.
Had you ever heard of the healing power of laughter?
They basically present him in this fish out of water scenario. And you know what? Sometimes that is entertaining. I mean, he's basically playing the part of the ignorant, burly American who mispronounces French words. Also, the literal concept of this movie is him being a police officer and forming an alliance with the people he is trying to catch. And I just never bought into the idea that Nick would do that. Again, based on what we already know about him. Nick was a brute of a character in the original, but he did also show this more personal and emotional side. A side to him that was very much on display in a lot of the scenes with his daughters and his wife. And in Pantera, that character depth has been somewhat removed. And as a result, he comes off as more of a caricature than anything.
What the hell am I looking at? When does this happen in the movie?
They try to remind you of his personal issues, and they try to use it in one scene in particular where he and Donnie are supposed to be bonding while sharing stories about their past, but it all felt very forced and very insincere to me. I just didn't buy into their dynamic one time throughout the course of this film. Another thing that I found somewhat surprising, but even more so disappointing, was the severe lack of action in this film. This movie is a lot of build-up, it's a lot of planning of the heist, which would normally be fine. But it's also a lot of personal stuff that really doesn't work. And it all culminates in the actual heist, which frankly, didn't feel anywhere near as difficult as it was being presented to us. We are told that this is going to be damn near impossible, but you never once feel that way throughout the course of the film as things unfold.
Not impressed.
There is finally a pretty decent shootout and car chase sequence in the third act of the film, but even that felt like it ended somewhat abruptly. Much like the first film, there is also a twist near the end of this film that I will obviously not reveal here. And I did think that that was a nice little touch, easily the best thing in the movie, and I even enjoyed the message behind it.
Message!
But on the flip side of that, it also led to a situation where it felt like this movie didn't know when to end. It just kind of kept going after some false finishes, and I thought it actually ruined the moment that was the most impactful thing in the whole film. Den of Thieves 2 Pantera unfortunately feels like one of those sequels that simply did not need to exist. They tried to craft some reasons in the story to justify this movie's existence, but at the end of the day, it all felt very underwhelming. The truth is that I felt next to nothing while watching this film, and that's why I'm more than comfortable giving it the Careless Sam Gerard.
I don't care! Y'all be cool. Right on.